welcome to the final episode of Econ-on-mics. Today, we're thrilled to bring you a special panel discussion moderated by Ashwini Deshpande, who is a professor of economics at Ashoka University in India and the core team lead of the International Economic Association's Women in Leadership and Economics initiative. Joining her are four remarkable speakers from previous episodes, sharing their experiences as women in the field of economics. This insightful discussion is presented by the International Economic Association's Women in Leadership and Economics initiative, in collaboration with Women in Econ and Policy. Thank you for tuning in.
Hello and welcome everyone to our panel discussion on the experience of being a woman economist in the academia. Internationally, there's a great deal of attention on underrepresentation of women in the economics profession at various stages of the profession. So starting from undergraduate students to graduate students to early career researchers to later senior researchers, also to academic administrators. The evidence suggests that there's a great need for establishing structures that will ensure gender parity. Most of this evidence has come from what we call the global north. So there are associations in the United States, for example, or in Europe, which are tracking the progress of women through these different stages. What this evidence shows is that while many women study economics, there are biases in hiring and promotion. There are differences in journal acceptance rates. Research also shows that the number of questions that, for example, female economists are asked in seminars and how many times they are interrupted varies compared to their male counterparts, and so on and so forth. So often there is evidence from the global north that women often drop out of the profession because the pressures are too intense. And this creates what is called the leaky pipeline. In other words, women advancing to the next stage of the profession start reducing in numbers as we go up higher and higher. To examine these questions from the perspective of the global south, the International Economic Association has now embarked on a 4-year project, which is called Women in Economics in Leadership, in short, IEAWE. And we have partnered with Women in Economics and Policy to produce a podcast. Today, we are here to discuss with some of our podcast speakers their own individual experiences and observations about women in economics. What makes this podcast special and what makes this project unique is that it is coming from the global south. And we find already, even though the project is just barely 1 year old, that there are big differences between the experience and the evidence from the global south compared to the global north. What we want to emphasize through this project is there are many different types of evidence that we get from different parts of the globe. And we want to bring that diversity of voices in the public domain, also to emphasize that there's no one-size-fits-all kind of solutions. Part of our project is called Amplifying Women's Voices. And we want to sort of, through the project, popularize the notion that expertise is not a male domain and expertise does not only lie in the global north. So that's the component that this particular podcast is representing. And today I'm very excited to welcome and introduce 4 of our podcast panelists, our guest speakers. From Argentina, we have Elisa Belfiori, who is professor at the Universidad Torquato di Tella in Buenos Aires. She's a macroeconomist working on the optimal design of climate policies with a focus on inequality and application of public finance. From Colombia, we have Adriana Camacho, who has been an associate professor at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota and has recently become the senior advisor for the direction of impact evaluation and policy learning at CAF, which is the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. Her areas of expertise include evaluation of social programs, poverty, and health. From India, we have Kanika Mahajan, who also happens to be my colleague at Ashoka University, who's an associate professor at Ashoka University Her work covers development economics with a particular focus on gender and labor, but she also looks at firms and economic growth, and she's one of the most important young voices in this field from India. And finally, from Sri Lanka, we have Nisha Arunatilake, who's the Director of Research at the Institute of Policy Studies in Sri Lanka. She has conducted extensive policy-related research on topics in labor market analysis, education, public finance, and health. So welcome everybody to this podcast. Let me first begin by asking, in the context of your experience from your particular countries, do you find that women are seriously underrepresented in economics? If yes, at what stages? And what do you think in your particular country context might be the reasons for that? So let me start with Elisa first.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. In Argentina, it's what we see is that there are many women in the undergraduate level. So when we look at the undergraduate program, maybe we see there is 50 and 50, men and women, but then women don't really get to do the master programs, and then less of them go to do a PhD abroad. So we don't really, there is a PhD program here in Buenos Aires, but most people try to go and study abroad. And we are concerned that we do have the women studying economics, undergraduate level, but then we lose them in the upper level studies. And then usually when you see that people that the placement for PhD programs, students that go and study the PhD program abroad, maybe if you have 10 people, there are going to be one woman or two women. So it's at that level you really get to see that you lose women. And then after at my stage, I stayed some time in the US. I did my PhD, and then I worked as an assistant professor in the United States for 4 years, and then I came back to Argentina. Well, then women are already not there, so they don't even have the PhD. So I guess in economics here, we are two among many guys.
Is this about not being able to go abroad as much, or is it about, even in PhD programs in the country, you don't find enough women applying to a PhD, or is it mainly that if you need a good PhD, you just go abroad? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's at least the part that I know. I cannot really, I don't really know the PhD program here in. I would say the best one is the one in the public University of Buenos Aires. And I do know women that have studied a PhD program there, but I don't know what's the situation. I don't know if that's, I do know women who have graduated for that very good PhD program locally, but I don't know if it's an exception or if there are many women. It's just my ignorance on that topic. I do know, so the career I did was on the other side. I didn't study in the public university. I came to detail. I did my master. And I don't recall, I think when you are young, maybe you are not that aware of these gender issues. I mean, I think I heard my mom talking about this many times as I was growing up. She's an engineer. And to me, it was not a big deal, even though, I mean, I guess if I go back and I look at my class, probably there were not that many women, but somehow it was not an issue I was aware. And I think I was not aware even when I did my PhD. I think I was lucky. In my class, there were many women. It was like half and a half. For a PhD program, that was strange, I think. Probably they made an effort. And then some of those women, we lost them. So they didn't make it. But still, I didn't feel, even in the PhD program, during, as I was a student, I didn't feel the gender gap as much, but maybe it was unique to my situation. I mean, that class, I mean, maybe if we look at the people that came after me, the gender disbalance was much higher. So I think I started being more aware of these issues as I grew older, when we were in the job market. Maybe we can talk about that later. At that point, I was noticing that, well, I mean, if I were a guy, maybe I would do better here. So yeah, I can tell you that's a part, among the people that go and study abroad. And I've talked to people in the economics department here. I think they don't have women. It's a concern that they have, that they don't have women in the faculty. And they tell me this, that they have students, but they don't do the master. And then among those that do the master, then they don't apply to go abroad. And sometimes I'm telling them, well, but are you mentoring them enough? So are you, because if you don't have the women faculty, then who is pushing the women to, who is telling them, yeah, you can do it, go try and study abroad. So that's what I observe among the people that go outside and study abroad. And there are really very few women.
Since we also have Adriana from Colombia, same region, Latin America, how do you feel about the Colombian experience relative to Argentina now that we've heard Elisa about Argentina?
Well, first, thanks so much for the invitation to this podcast. It's very interesting to learn how the other regions go in this direction. And what I see is that the condition in Colombia is very similar. In fact, in our university, in the undergrad, we have even a little bit less women than men, like 45% versus 55%, so more men. That's not the case in other universities. It might be the case because it was very competitive to enter in previous years, and then we were getting more men, a little bit more men. But when you look at the grades, women do very good. They even do better than men. But I think that the differences, so they're in the mean, let's say, they are very good or better than men. But the outliers, let's say, are males. They are very good males that are speaking a lot in class. So I think that one of the big differences is that maybe they are louder, they speak more, they are less risk averse, they go out and say things. So I think that's something that makes females get back into the positions of being, for example, TAs or RAs or things like that. And I think that's the initial step for having a good, let's say, CV in order to apply to a PhD or to get better jobs or do better, at least in many contexts in the professional life. So what the university has tried to do is to be conscious of having some spaces for TAs which are females, like try to compare them. If males are the ones who are teaching a class, then try to make a female that it's an expert in the area and go and give one of the classes so that they see that it's not, let's say, a topic that is dominated by males only. So try to show role models, let's say. But saying all this, it's also important to know that Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, we had a lot of females who have been in very high positions. So we had like 2 deans in the faculty, which have been females. The actual president, I don't know how you say it, the rector, the president of the university is a female, is an economist. So I think we had lots of visibility from a very small group of females. So I'm very proud of that because we're kind of, 7 women out of 40. And we are doing a very good job in terms of showing, because males and students and let's say everybody says outside that females in economics in Colombia are strong. So I think that's the case in Colombia. And what I was telling maybe about why I don't see them like going further into doing a PhD, for example, could be, I think that it could be a matter of risk aversion or the harsh environment that we have, and maybe they just quit a little bit earlier than men.
Can I ask something regarding what Adriana was saying about so I do know women in Colombia, like they are doing, so you were mentioning they are working as a dean or as a president of the university, but I was thinking whether, I think in a way I'm feeling that men have realized that it's convenient for them to have women doing the administrative stuff. And so I was wondering whether that can sound like progress or that is kind of part of the program to show the problem of showing off. It's like institutions like to show off that women are in a position of power, but in fact, it's not power what they have, it's work, administrative work, which is what they don't want to do. So I think there is like a fine line even though I know you don't get to be the dean of the department if you don't have the qualifications for that, for sure. But I don't know. I think that is risky. I mean, I'm very cautious about saying, well, yeah, this is progress because now we have women in positions of power, when in fact the real power is somewhere else.
That's an interesting perspective. We'll come back to that. Let's just go over now to South Asia, and then we'll come back to the question of what does academic leadership signify? Does it signify power, or does it signify a more gendered division of labor? We can come back to that question. But I want to move to Kanika now and ask her about her views on what she has experienced herself, but also her broader observations about institutions in India. Kanika.
Thanks, Ashwini. Thanks. It's great to be a part of this panel and to be able to discuss the inequities in the Indian academia. So actually, listening to to Elisa and Adriana, I think the first observation I had was in India, in fact, at the undergrad level in economics, I would say there are more women than men. Clearly, whether it was my class, the friends I knew across different universities, different colleges, or in fact, even the data. So we don't have data for the undergrad level, but I had seen data at the postgrad level as well. And even there in economics, we actually find that 55% amongst all the students who are doing their masters in economics, 55% are almost women in India. And I think that is sort of different from the experience in Colombia, and to a certain extent, like the overall Latin American experience here. So we do have a lot more women pursuing higher education in economics. Now, when it comes to going for a PhD, there I think there are two observations which I have. One, on an average, I think women are slightly less than men, but I don't think a lot more when it comes to doing PhD in Indian institutions. So for instance, like I would say about 40 to 50% are women across most Indian PhD programs that I've seen, and I've known them for some time. I think when it comes to going outside for a PhD, that I have seen that there the number of women are definitely less from India. So amongst the students who apply for a PhD outside versus who apply for a PhD within the country, I would say women form a higher proportion within the country as opposed to outside the country. And I think there, in general, the fact that maybe parents are not very comfortable sending their, their girl children outside, away from them, which is at a, it's miles and miles across, of course, plays a large part in what I have seen, because I've had conversations with many master's students actually within Ashoka and outside Ashoka, where they have told me that they cannot go for a PhD outside. In fact, I'm a PhD product from India. I did not go for my PhD outside. For me, it was not parental pressure as such. There were other considerations. I was fed up of my corporate job and I just wanted to change, desperate change. And I had lost the cycle to apply outside. And I knew that Indian Statistical Institute is one of the premier institutes. And I thought, let me take my chance. If I get through, great. If I don't, I'll apply next year. That was my story. But amongst all the girl students that I have at least mentored over the past many years, one thing has been constant, that they will not be able to go to the US or to Europe because of family considerations. They just can't do it. And hence, if they do a PhD, they would prefer do it. They would prefer to do it within India than outside India. In fact, they would come to me that since you've done it within India, clearly it's doable. So what advice would you, so how should we strategize? And I think that's why they came to me, because they were looking for options within country, like vis-a-vis applying outside the country. So I think that plays some role in terms of family playing a role in guiding them in terms of where to do their PhD, given the setting of Indian households. I think that plays a role. Now, coming to academia, after you've done your PhD, in general, I think in Indian academia, there's also a similar gender gap that exists outside. If I were to not look at economics, because I think the problem in economics is graver in India as opposed to, say, the other disciplines. And that, I think that varies across two dimensions in India. I had recently read, an article, and there, it was discussed that it differs by the field. So, the more technical fields, the more STEM kind of fields tend to have a lower representation of women in academia in India. And second, it also varies by, public, private, state universities, because the kind of amenities, the kind of value that people also place on these jobs is different. So, for instance, I think you'll have a much better representation of women in academia across disciplines, including economics, in public institutions, as opposed to, say, private or I would say even central universities, or universities like the Indian Institutes of Management or Technology, which are premier institutes. So you see a larger gender gap there in academia as opposed to, say, the usual central state government-run universities in India. And it goes from, say, 40% of women being assistant professors to 25% being full professors across these universities. And in economics, that's even lower. So in economics, this ranges from, it starts from 35% and it goes, say, up to, 15% at the professorial position. Of course, this again varies across the type of university that you're looking at. So there is a gender gap, clear gender gap in academia in India. It worsens, as you go higher up the ladder, from the assistant professor position to the professorial position, larger amongst higher institutes of learning as opposed to central and state universities. I think that's my broader observation, at least when it comes to the gender gap within Indian academia and within that specifically economics.
Thanks, Kanika and Elisa, both of you, for pointing out, one of the sort of points where the divergence starts to happen, which is the lower ability of women to go abroad, I think, whether due to family considerations or whatever else. And so that seems to be a common feature. Having said that, I must say also, that Ashoka University, where both Kanika and I teach, we are an exception to the rule that Kanika pointed out, which is both at the level of the faculty and at the level of students. It's a private university, but in economics, actually, we have compared to many other departments, we have a good gender representation. I also want to say, for the benefit of podcast listeners, that one component of this project is what we are calling creating an evidence base. So we have 6 teams working in 6 different countries that are collating data across all levels of students, all level of faculty, and wherever possible historically. So they will start with the most recent picture, but wherever possible, they are collating data going back as much as they can. We are also trying to take information from publicly available CVs to look at the kinds of publications as well as going the career progression. And so India is one of those countries, and so is Colombia. So more detailed data from India and Colombia will come up, as a part of the project. And I wanted to say this before I move to Nisha, because here what we are discussing are what we believe to be the evidence, but a more comprehensive evidence base will come as a part of our project towards the end of when we conclude over the next 3 years. With these words, let me turn to Nisha Arunatilake, who's from Sri Lanka. So Nisha, what are your thoughts on the gender gap in economics?
So I think Sri Lanka's experience is quite similar to what Kanika was explaining in India. So we have actually the girls do better at the high school level and higher percentages of females get into the universities in Sri Lanka. There again, we see that some specific courses like engineering, there are lesser number of women, but in all the other fields, there are more women. So I personally, myself, PhD in the US, not necessarily because I chose to do that, but because of the conflicts that were happening in Sri Lanka. So when I was coming out of high school, the universities in Sri Lanka were closed and there were a lot of problems. So I didn't have an option of studying in Sri Lanka. Therefore, I had to apply and go abroad to do my studies. And then I went on to do my PhD there as well. there again, in my PhD program, I got my PhD from Duke. I was, out of the 30 of us, we had only about 6 females. And I had to actually learn to play basketball so that I could belong to a study group, because they used to always play a game of basketball before they started studying. So those are some of the challenges that I had to face, being, among the very few females who were there. So coming back to Sri Lanka, I work in a think tank. So here again, we actually have problems bringing in males. So our head of our institute is Dr. Dushnibira Kohn, is a female, and I am female. And out of the 9 research fellows that we have, 6 are female. All of us have studied abroad, partly, I think, because of and we do have 3 male research fellows also. So in that respect, you would think that females are doing better, but not necessarily, because the problem is that the wages that we get in my institute, if you compare it with the business sector, it is not very good. So even the male research assistants or junior level researchers who come into the institute, they ought to go out after a few years because of the pay. And the females tend to stay on, and very few females. So some of the 2 of the 3 senior researchers that we have, male senior researchers we have, are actually quite young. They have just joined. So that is one of the reasons I think that they go up. So even in the universities, I would say we have more female professors. That partly because in the way the universities work in Sri Lanka is that the best students who come out of theirs, so they recruit their own students. So because more females are studying, it so happens that more females want to go into academia because it's an easier job. You have a lot of free time, and because they choose to go, you find more females. So there are reasons there. But in saying that, at, say, dean levels or, as a vice chancellor, very recently, we had our first female vice chancellor at the University of Kalani. Until then, it was always males. So that's the difference. And one challenge, so I'm unlike the others who spoke, I don't work at a university, I'm at a think tank. So what we need to do is we need to engage with policymakers and try to influence policies in different ways. So that used to be quite challenging initially. So as a young female, it was quite challenging to make my voice heard. But now that I'm a more established researcher, I think people listen to me a little bit more. But I see that even in the junior researchers that, they are not very vocal, and partly because they don't see good role models, and they're more backward. So we have to kind of push them to go and engage with policymakers and in policy committees.
Thank you, Nisha. So one question to all of you, which is that Nisha talked about the difficulties of getting policymakers to listen to expertise when it's coming from a woman, particularly from a younger woman. And some of you are in departments where you may not, where women may not form a large enough critical mass. So it's always a question of, you might say something deeply insightful, but are others, your colleagues or your peers or your, policymakers or whoever you're speaking to, are they listening to you? So, based upon what you've experienced or also what you see around you, what are your thoughts about these specific challenges that women experts face? What are the different ways in which we make sure that female voices are heard more seriously by peers or by colleagues or by policymakers? So maybe we go in the same order. Elisa, you want to start?
I mean, I don't have data. It's not that I can tell you for sure. But my feeling is that women need more credentials to be heard. So you have to really be much better than a guy in order to to people to really listen to you. So it's like guys with not that many achievements or papers or however you want to evaluate performance. They are going to get into the news. They are going to get into policymakers. And a woman in that position with those credentials wouldn't. It's not that you're not going to be heard, but you really have to prove yourself. And that is something that, so it's weird, like being a woman, like saying that, but my ex is not, I'm not talking about me. I'm just saying when I get to meet women like who have a voice, what I have learned is that they are much better than men. So those that get there, they are much better than their colleagues. And again, it's so that's I think that translates to everything, not only the academic life, but also like everything related to having a voice and get that public exposure to policymakers and public in general.
Yeah, I mean, they say that you have to work twice as hard to prove that you're just as good.
Yes.
So I think it's a cliche, but it's unfortunately true. Adriana, you want to go next?
Well, I think that it's very similar to what Elisa was saying. And maybe just to add a little bit is if you have females who are leading your groups, then they might hear you better than men would do. Maybe females would, like if they join together, they would be doing things for themselves and hearing each other more. And maybe something additional is that we might get used to not being heard. And we might not think that it's something that should be happening, or we don't realize that we were not heard, and that somebody maybe said something similar to what we said, and that was okay, or that was much more heard than us. For example, in a seminar, when you repeat something that somebody said, and because that happens a lot, in an addition or a comment that we just heard, and they say it in another word, in another way, maybe that might be heard more if it's a male than a female, or those kind of things. I think we might not be aware of, and I think we need to. But still, I would say that in my position, I think in my case, I feel heard, maybe because we work a lot to be heard, and maybe because of what I was saying, that we have a very strong group of females working, very small but very strong group of females working together. So that has been good for us.
Yeah, that's right, Adriana. Thank you. Kanika, what do you feel?
I feel in India it's rampant. I've personally sort of dealt with it in many forums, especially in India when you interact with government officials. I've actually personally faced it when it's been so apparent that people have come to me at the end of the round table and come back and said that what you were saying made perfect sense, but the guy on the other side of the table just rubbished it. And everyone notices it. It's not like only I notice it. I think it's quite apparent to people in that room, in which I think there are only 2 women out of, say, 20 people in that room. Because anyways, I think when it comes to policy making, there are very few women at the top in India. And now thinking sort of more deeply about the issue, correct me if I'm wrong, Ashwini, but I don't think there has been any chief economic advisor in India who's been a woman ever. And even within the major policy think tank of India, everyone at the top is actually a male person. And that's where I have felt, this sort of backlash, or this inability to accept or recognize suggestions or, viewpoints that are coming from women in a more starker way, as opposed to, say, institutions where women are leading it. So, for instance, there are now like NCAR and the other institutions which are actually led by women. These are also think tanks and policy spaces in the country. And I see a change. So, for instance, I think since NCAR has been, held by, a woman, I think there have been instances where more women have been deliberately invited by by the institute into many of these meetings, to be a part of these meetings with the policymakers. I think the representation in those institutes is better for women, where women are leading them. So, you have very few women leading these think tanks, right? That leads to a lower space for women in India to be a part of these policy discussions. But where they are leading it, I think that's where they're getting more and more traction. So I agree with the fact that I think in the policy making space, when it comes to Indian economic researchers, I think women definitely get a backseat, hands down.
No, Kanika, you're absolutely right. And I think you also pointed to a very important fact about women in leadership. Often people say, what's the point of just having a leader who's female? Isn't that, a sort of just you fulfilling, checking a box,
a tokenism,
et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is that things do change when women are at the top. When they come into the leadership, things at the bottom start to change as well. So I think there's something to be said for that. So Nisha, what do you? I mean, your comments sparked this whole question, but any further thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. So I also experience, like Kanika said, that I'm one of the few women most often in these policy making communities. And it's very difficult not only to make my voice heard, but to get the males to see it from my perspective. I can give you this one example. So for in Sri Lanka, we have a lot of low-skilled migrants going abroad to the Middle East. And a policy was brought in when they have young children, they need to have a family background report. But the ministry said that it is too much work for them to go through these reports for everybody who is going abroad. So the solution was to only do it for mothers and not for fathers. And I, of course, was vehemently protesting that this can't be, because fathers should also be considered as parents. But nobody saw it. This was an easy solution for them. So because of this, it's a bit costlier for females to go abroad because they have to file this family background report and make sure their kids are well looked after before they do so. But males don't have to do the same. So that was one very particular instance, which is very difficult because all the rest of them just couldn't even understand what I was talking about. Because for them, so that is also why it is so important to have more females in these communities, so that, there's a different perspective.
Yeah, I think what Nisha and Kanika's observations are bringing to the fore is the fact that having women giving of advice, because women are able to see some specific aspects of women's lives, so that can feed into the policy. So in India, for example, a lot of policies get made about women, about women's welfare, by men sitting in New Delhi who don't have the faintest clue about what a daily life, a day in the life of a woman looks like. And so there's the gender perspective, even in terms of shaping the policy. And then, of course, the additional question of female expertise being considered as genuine expertise, right? And of course, if I can just include my own experience, there's also a lot of unconscious bias, right? So there are people that we interact with, who are not openly misogynist or openly chauvinistic, but there is a lot of unconscious bias. There are just little things that will get said or get done that a male colleague will never experience, right? So I'm currently the chair of the department, and the previous chairs have been male. And sometimes just for fun, so I talk to some of them and ask them, I faced this. Did you face this? And they are friends of mine. And so there are these little, and this is unconscious bias. It's not that somebody is deliberately trying to be mean or chauvinistic or misogynist or anything like that. So anyway, so that's coming back now to academics. At least from the American experience, there is a belief that a greater entry of women in economics and the economics profession has led to a diversification of topics that are now considered legitimately economics. My question is that if you look at the fields that get studied by economics students and researchers, professors, and the topics that get studied, if you compare the set of topics that are getting researched today and compare them to, say, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, many more topics related to social identity, related to gender explicitly, related to education, health, early childhood, et cetera, many more things today are regarded as legitimate economics compared to, say, 25 or 30 years ago, where the field of inquiry of academic economics were much more restricted to these hard, economic issues about, prices or, inflation or things like that, consumers and producers and stuff like that, markets and so on. Do you think that this shift is just about the economics profession becoming wider due to multiple factors, or do you think the greater entry of women has had a role to play in this diversification of the field?
Yes, I mean, I never thought about it this way. I think the wider range of topics comes from having more tools as well, like processing, more powerful tools to processing data. I think economics is a social science. Maybe before we didn't have the ability to get that data, and now we can. So I don't have a strong feeling that is coming from women. Maybe the gender research, I mean, has been led by women. So that's probably, but other topics like health or behavioral economics, I think it's coming more from having more tools available for the analysis.
I had one experience where, many years ago, I was asked by someone to tell me my fields in which I'm doing my research. And when I mentioned gender and labor, the reaction was, of course. I think that was a stereotype working that if you're a female, then within economics, but what are the typical fields that you would be working in? And that was a very, very spontaneous reaction. And it was a male, right? Whose spontaneous reaction was, yeah, of course. I'm like, yeah, probably that is what you would be working in anyways. I probably wouldn't have guessed anything different. And that actually made me sit up and realize that, even within our department, I would say within Ashoka, I think many more females work in topics which are co-dev eco, as opposed to, I think, many men in the department. If I would now sort of start thinking the proportion of women working across different subfields, I think women would dominate in dev eco as opposed to the other fields. And if I think that might be true across most, because, you work in an area which you feel, more passionately about. And I think as women, we do feel more passionate about these issues, and hence we end up working in these areas. But I do agree with the fact that I think on average, I think women probably work more on typical, say, dev eco kind of topics and fields as opposed to men. Second, I feel that development economics really caught up, not just, I think, gender economics, again, I think was a bastion of female economists as such. And it's only, I think, for the last 15 years that you also see men more and more sort of becoming a part of mainstream gender economics. But in general, I think development economics in the last 15, 20 years has gained momentum, partly because of RCTs, and I think partly also because you've got many more men working in these areas. Now that I think, there might be some role being played by what is fashionable to do and what's not, right? So when Claudia Golden probably started in 80s and 90s on sort of focusing her research on gender and women, it was probably not that mainstream. But over time, it's become mainstream because of greater participation by men also, I think, in this field. And I do think that does operate at some subconscious level, that when men sort of break into a field, then probably that becomes also important. Maybe that's important enough. That's why men are now in this field. I do think that kind of subconscious bias probably exists in the field.
Well, thanks, Kanika and Elisa. Both of you have provided a sort of a different perspective on this question. So that's really thought-provoking. Adriana, what do you feel?
I was just going to mention something I remembered when once I went to work with somebody at the World Bank. We were studying the conditional cash transfers here in Colombia, and they had financed a lot of the program. So we had the data of the government, and I just went for 1 week to work with them in Washington. And they used to be in the IMF building. They used to be in one floor of the IMF building. And when I was downstairs, like waiting in the reception for me to go upstairs, I just met some guy who just started talking, and he was asking, "What are you doing?" And I said, "No, I look at poverty programs." And he just said, "Oh, you do that kind of economics, that type of economics. You don't do real economics," something like that. So just about talking about this, I just remember that I don't really take it very seriously. I just said, okay, this guy, yes, it's the IMF. but I feel weird, like all the other buildings around in the World Bank just study conditional cash transfers, let's say. But it was a weird situation. And what you were talking about, economics moving into other topics, I really believe that the RCTs and the causal inference that RCTs are giving recently might be the way in which, and the data that we collect, the microeconometrics that we recently are doing makes it, let's say, a field where it's much more easier to publish better, and which is leading, let's say, the development economics literature. And so I think it's good that these kind of topics are also the ones that most women, not all, because we have here women that are macroeconomists, but it's a field where we see a lot of females working. So I think the push comes from that side, not from women pushing or being leading those topics and putting them in the top.
Well, now the IMF actually focuses a lot on gender. They have now gender strategy, and they keep having meetings, and they call women experts. So
I just want to say that this happened in 2000 and I don't know, that was like 2010, 12.
Yeah, it's a recent, like last decade, I would say. But yeah, I mean, that's so I mean, people have mixed views about this mainstreaming gender by the mainstream organizations. But anyway, I think of it as a positive.
And it's not an organization, let's say. It was some guy I met in the first floor that I didn't even know.
Yeah, Nisha, what do you feel about this?
So what I feel is this is a problem that we have, I think, being a think tank from the South. We don't have a lot of money to set our own agenda because we are very much dependent on the projects, which calls for proposals and we have to apply for them. So we have very little money. We do conduct our own research, but we have very small amount of money for that. So, but in terms of a lot of the research that have been shaping our research agenda, the topics have come from abroad. And I do see that there is a lot more attention to gender sensitivity and also gender transformative kind of research coming especially from IDRC or World Bank. And they are into new areas like she trades, even into trade, they look at gender issues. So it's very difficult to say because whatever the research that are initiated at IPS, we have little money. And so we have to prioritize in the knowledge gaps. It's not an easy comparison.
All right. Now, the final question, we have two recent female Nobel laureates in economics, Esther Duflo and Claudia Golden. And of course, it's linked also to the question of, broader development economics, etc. But obviously, it's super inspiring to have, at least two out of the, 99 or whatever it is, economics Nobel laureates. One, we talked about the influence of role models, and I think having them at the very top honor, receiving the very top honor that the field has, I mean, that's good. Obviously, we'll agree. And, given that you have had to, traverse different journeys, overcome barriers, small or big, through your personal journeys, what would be your advice to young women? Let's say, think of an undergraduate student, who is considering economics as a career.
So one advice I give to all the research assistants who join IPS is that they need to develop their core skills, the analytical skills, the writing skills, the research communication skills, because a lot of the times I see that they don't give enough attention to developing their skills at a young age, and then they get stuck. They go up to a certain level and then they can't go beyond. And they need to do that when they are young and not perhaps burdened by other things. But a lot of the times they take shortcuts, and so that's where I see. So I would say make sure you are the best at all these, not only one or two things, because some try to just go with one skill or writing or just analysis. But research communication is very important. So you need to look at this whole range of skills and develop them.
But you will encourage them to do economics, right?
Yeah, of course, in economics, I mean, as part of economics, I think they need to do this. Yes, definitely.
Right. Okay, who wants to go next?
If you want, I'll go.
Adriana, sure.
Yes, I had lots of students going through thesis presentations or preparing their thesis in the masters. And I think maybe one of the ways I try to push them is that when I see them preparing, I see that females have much better work many times and they are not confident about it. So I just try to tell them all the time, your work is much better than many others that I have seen, and you're not sure about yourself. You don't speak loud as you should speak. You don't. Let's say you need more attitude to be able to sell your work. So I try to encourage them to know that they are better, that they are doing well, and that that need to have more attitude. And the other thing that I might be doing and try to do a lot is try to show them how much I like doing research and how much I like my topics, and like putting more, let's say, heart into what you do, and being enthusiastic about it. I think that makes them feel, oh, that's great, and there's somebody who likes it a lot and who I might be like following or doing something similar. So I think that's the way I do it.
Excellent. So now we have two things at least. One is all young women listening to us, A, develop your core skills. B, you're better than you think. Be confident about what you know. You are definitely not any worse than your male peers, and be confident about how you're projecting yourself. And if we are passionate about our own work, that'll rub off on our students and the young people that we mentor. Now, Elisa and Kanika.
So I do the C. The C for me will be just do it. It's like don't think too much about it. If you can imagine yourself doing economics, that's what you should do. I mean, sometimes we wait for approval, like oh yeah, go and do it, or yeah, you are good enough, go and do it. It's just sometimes it's just you have to begin writing, begin studying, and things fall in the right place. But many times, I mean, if we are going to wait for that push, we are going to wait for that mentor to arrive. I mean, it may not arrive ever. And maybe if you're a guy, it will arrive. So just go and do it. And to me, economics is a way of expressing ourselves. So it's also a way to have a voice. It's like I do convey the message that I have through the papers that I write. And sometimes it's easier than having the microphone. It's a way of speaking up. So that's also good to say. To have in mind.
Final word from Kanika.
So I've actually given apart from I think skilling, that's one advice I've given often to my students, especially female students, because I think they do don't end up developing the core skills that probably are increasing in demand in economics at the rate at which men do. But apart from that, I think two pieces of advice that I've often given to especially female students. One is being thick-skinned. Because I think female students take negative advice or like negative feedback. They really sort of take it as an attack on their inability to do something in future. And that's one thing I've told them often, even, the PhD students that I've mentored across institutions, that believe me, people have done much worse than you. Don't take the attack in a seminar or in a conference, or even when you're presenting to the department, make you feel bad about your work. So just being thick-skinned and not making too much out of what people tell you in that small room. That's one advice. Second, I've often had, especially my research assistants and even some of the master's students come up to me and actually ask me that you work so much, how are you able to do that? Given that, you also, I think women sort of realize that they anticipate what's coming for them when they are at this, at the stage itself that you have a kid, you have a family, how do you manage? And I've always told them that you have to speak for yourself, in any relationship, whether that's with your parents or, with once you get married. if you really want to do something, it is on you, right? You have to find a way of doing it, and you have to speak up if you think that you are not getting the space or the time that you need to be able to do that you value. So speaking up for yourself when required is something, given the Indian society, I think that's also something that women need to learn early on. So yeah, specific to women, I think these are the two pieces of advice I've often given them.
Well, that's excellent advice, Kanika. So core skills, be confident, be thick-skinned, and make room for yourself. Make yourself heard, make space for your own time, make room for yourself. And as Elisa says, just do it. So, I think we've had an excellent conversation with 4 amazing women who you've heard earlier on their individual podcasts. If you have not, please go back and listen to their episodes and then come back to this. And I hope our listeners find the reflections of our guests tonight, as well as their insights and their advice, very useful going forward as all of you navigate your own careers and your own path in the journey to becoming academic economists, to those of you who are going to become academic economists. So with that, thank you very much to all the 4 speakers, and good night, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're listening.
Thank you for joining us. A special thanks to our brilliant speakers and interviewers for their valuable contributions. Share your favorite moments using the hashtag #AmplifyingVoices and stay tuned for more impactful discussions.